All right, crew. Welcome to Healthy Curves at Monarch Family Chiropractic and Spinal Workshop here at the start of September. So those of you new to this workshop, welcome. We're glad to have you there and here with us. And also know before we get started that we are live in the office as well. So any of you coming for wanting to come for end of day adjustments and stay for workshop, please do. We get to engage more directly when you're in front of us. So you'll also be able to raise hands, ask questions. We will do that towards the end of the workshop. So I'll open things back up to do that as best as I can. And so you're going to see some of screen and slides, and I'll have you chime in if you're not seeing them. But we're going to talk about how it is very important and vital for our health that we have curves in our spine. When you look straight through someone, there should be no curve. It should be straight. But when you look at someone from the side view, you should see a curve. And there's lots of reasons for that. We're going to talk about them in different stages, but this is something looking at the spine, looking at a section of it, looking at the joints and the discs between the vertebra, and how the one on the far left is a healthy spine and healthy disc, healthy fluid then and spaces between them. Why that's so important is because you see that when there's healthy space, the where that disc is between each bone, you're going to see that then that nerve canal is got more ability for that nerve to exit out the side of it on both the left and the right from the spinal cord at the middle to get that signal out to all your parts and pieces, right? So when you have healthy movement, mobility, and space, which usually comes from having the curves where they're supposed to be, then you have a healthy nervous system, or a healthier nervous system, because that flow of signal out and signal in is much more capable of doing its job with much less stress on it. So we see stages of degeneration when those things aren't intact, when there's not proper movement of the spine, when the spine's had traumas that it hasn't been able to be corrected from, and a curve loss can straighten and then compress the spine. So what you're seeing is stages one, where there's starting to be some compression. What I call the disc is like a jelly of the inside of a donut. Is you squeeze that donut, the jelly's going to go somewhere, right? It doesn't stay in that center. The disc works very similar. It's gelatinous and jelly cushion that keeps, again, the bones from touching and keeps the space for the nerves to exit. When you get into stages where it's not having mobility for years, usually at a time, we're going to start seeing phase 2 and phase 3. That's where the bone is changing shape because there isn't the movement it should have. The disc then starts pushing out as you see the dark color on that picture. Oh, you're not seeing my picture. Well, I don't know if you guys on my screen are. Do we have we are plugged in. It's weird. It's not moving to the next slide up on the other screen. Sorry, guys, give us 1 second. Cows, we're trying to figure out what the technological problem is today. We didn't have it last week. It worked just fine. What the heck? Now I'm clicking on them versus scrolling like I usually do, but I don't think that should matter.
No, it shouldn't matter.
Okay.
Let's see.
1 moment, please. There it
Did I do
goes.
anything?
You got it.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm pulling the tech whiz here. I know nothing about how to change that over. Yeah, I know our computer's not excited. So, okay, now we're all looking at the same thing. So again, in phase 2, how you see that the disc is now protruding out on that left side and the bone's getting jagged. That is, again, from improper movement or support of the curve, keeping pressure off an area, and instead it's compressing onto. We tend to see with x-rays, when you see bones that look like phase 2, phase 3, we know that things have been there anywhere from 7 to 10 years or 15 plus as we start seeing things as that phase 2 into phase 3. That's decade or two worth of degeneration, damage, improper motion or mobility of the spine, or improper curves, creating that compression and that basically arthritis, right? That aging and bone changing and discs loss to happen faster than it's supposed to. Most of our spines with a lot of technology that's out there that tests how well a structure should last, our original parts and pieces, if treated well and taken care of over life, many times they say should live till we're close to 100 years old. So most of the time should outlive us in a lot of the things we do in our bodies and in activity. So we want to see things on obviously the left side. And phase one is really typical in our day and age with a lot of sitting. If you guys haven't caught the sitting workshop, you need to see it. Doc just did it again with ergonomics and covers a lot of how sitting is killing us, how it's creating this compression and aging of our spine and degenerating us faster. So we're going to keep moving through and then getting to looking at posture and what that looks like and what that creates. Yeah, it's switching. Okay. So here's looking at posture of someone on x-ray. And when we take your posture picture in the office and look at where you're balanced, where we're drawing the lines and the dots to really see that is, especially if we don't have an x-ray, but here it is, we do, of how, a shoulder is higher than the other. So when we draw those red lines and dots horizontally, that's measuring the top of the shoulders, the middle of the chest, the top of the hips, and then they're at the front of the ankle bones on either side. So you can see how this gentleman is really tipping to our looking left, his right, where he's the red line and the green line is what we call the plumb line, that is dead center. And so that's where his nose and his collarbone should match up there. And you can see that they very much deviate to, again, our looking left, instead of sitting on that green line. So that's creating postural distortion over time inside at the frame and the structure of his spine, therefore putting more pressure on the nervous system and those nerves and exiting components, right? Signaling to the part of his body, especially in his upper thoracic. So that's his upper chest and upper back area and his neck. So then looking at his x-ray, you can really see that his head tilts to the right, his whole neck tilts to that right. Again, our looking left at the picture, and has a little curve in it as you hit the collarbone and kind of that start of the upper back. So this plays a part in how our structure then will change and degenerate faster the longer these postural distortions are there. So we're going to look at another example now from the side view. Okay, same person, side picture of the of his posture standing and of the x-ray. So similar, green line is where we want all those red dots and lines to match up. So we see that forward head carriage where his head and his ears are over quite a bit forward from his shoulders instead of right over his shoulder dot. And then the dot at the front of his, side of his hip, and then at the knee, and then at the side of the ankle. So then looking at how that plays forward in the x-ray, you want ear over shoulder, shoulder over hip, hip over knee, knee over ankles. So in this loss of some neck curve and it tipping forward, that's also rounding the shoulders and making the upper back more prominent. And most of the time where people feel their discomfort, it isn't always where the curve is being initially lost. It's the areas below it that have to pick up the stress. So the curves of the spine, especially this neck curve, has been termed by neurologists the arc of life. And that is very true and purposeful to the fact that that we know, and neurologists and scientists that are studying neurology and the spine and the communication between brain and the body, if that curve is not intact properly, puts more stress on the nervous system and the brain. So the arc of life is really when we ask you on your quizzes in the office, on your progress evaluations, it's the neck curve. If that curve is lost, which is the most common to lose, you will have a loss of function, a loss of communication between brain and body, and it has to work a lot harder to get that signal through. And so as the head tips forward, which you may see in a different slide, more specifics down the presentation here, is that as we get more, 10 degree, 15 degree of tilt forward, you're gaining like 10, 15 pounds of pressure into onto the neck and shoulders, the more you tip forward. So it's really important that our head feel like our head weight. This person's head weight probably feels about 25 to 35 pounds versus the 10 to 12 pounds that it is when you have a forward posture or a forward angle like this. So here's looking at, and again, I have a lot of patients who they don't come in having discomfort in the neck. It's the mid or the low back, because those curves are now taking over the stress of this neck curve not doing its job. So that those compounding forces of physics and just the weight of our body and gravity tend to then put that stress into the mid and to the low. So here's looking at just a neck spine curve. And now this is just the person turned the other way. So you see the back of the skull on the right and the jaw and teeth on the left. So we want, this is when we talk about, we want a banana curve in the neck, right? That's the arc of life. When you have a natural curve, it looks like the picture on the left. The ears sit right over the shoulders. And there's good dark gray space. I'll try to use my pointer if you can see that right here between each of the vertebrae. Now this one's lacking right here, but all the rest have really good space. That is a good natural curve that it's supposed to have. And I don't have this one measured, but the angle of the first bone right up top here should be about 25 to 30 degrees. That's textbook normal or optimal. Why you have that, why that curve is so important or why that matters to that angle is if you have a curve, that angle is big and means that space between the back of the skull right here, hopefully you can see my pointer moving, and that first bone we call the atlas, right? That first bone of the neck, there's lots of space right here between. So there's not touching and rubbing where that spinal cord exits the brain, leaves the brain and then becomes called, then is called the spinal cord, right? So right as it exits that opening of the skull, it comes through to that first vertebra. It has the most mechanoreceptors, the most signaling that the body needs to do right at that first vertebra, right at that space. So we need no pressure on that space, because if you compress there, you are then compressing the signal all the rest of the way down the path to the mid back, low back, heart, lungs, liver, all of your organ systems, all the way down to your feet. And then that signal getting all the way back up. So the more we see degeneration or change, you can see how the picture on the right does not look like the other, right? It's kind of like playing that game. Which one of these is not like the other and what doesn't look normal or natural? You can see how that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th vertebra down doesn't sit in line with the rest, right? It's sitting back here. And their bone is not boxy and square. It's starting to change shape and form little points here. As well as you can see how there's very little space between that vertebra, where the other ones above and below have good dark space. So this is a lack of curve and some damage that has been done. It can be whiplash. It could be repetitive concussion type falls like skiing accidents, kids playing sports and either compounding and hitting each other or hitting and landing on the ground. Playing as a kid, falling off swing sets. I mean, lots of different things. And it doesn't have to be trauma in the sense of something that we think of as a single motion or a repetitive movement that way. It can be just the forward motion of looking down at our computers and our phones all the time, putting things in our lap, reading from our lap versus right up here in front of us. So we teach our kids to hold their phones, put their one elbow under the other and hold their phones here at their face instead of down here in their lap. Setting up laptops on a couple books where you maybe get a detached wireless little keyboard and you type at a keyboard level where your hand should be and your eyes look up in front of you at your screen, right? So all ways that really support a healthy curve is not doing repetitive postures, looking down. So that's a big piece that like we start seeing this with kids because they're on devices at a very young age and possibly in their books or now in their laptops and phones at a very young age. So again, a normal neck and what a compressed spine looks like. And I say age is a number, and it really is, because here's a picture of someone that is in a healthier spine at a 75-year-old age, and someone with poor posture tipping forward, how that spine ages and changes the bony shape. And for someone who's, in their mid 50s, it shows the degeneration and turns then into chronic pain, but it is that compression that happens that doesn't need to be there at that young of an age. So again, looking at the changes in the bone right here, unfortunately, that person has probably had that since 20s or 30s easily. When you look at the middle of the back, again, it can compress and look more like the spine on the right and look more straight instead of have that opposite curve that it's designed to have. If the upper neck curve gets compressed, more stress goes into this mid. So there's a very natural looking curve, which is the opposite direction, right, of the neck and low back. And then one that is more flattened and straight over time. And again, I don't know if I doubt I can zoom in on it with my capabilities here today. But if you can see my pointer, you can even just see right here where it's flattened out, how the little tips of the bone are starting to, again, age and change shape right through here on that front side of the vertebra here that faces the stomach. And then as we get into our low back, again, that should be that C-shaped, banana shape curve as well. A more natural looking curve or spine is the left, and a lot of rotation. Whoa, rotation and change. As you can see, these vertebrae don't line up to each other here in the back, where all of these do follow a nice kind of smooth arc and curve. And that creates this nice big dark space, right? For those big lumbar nerves to exit and go to everything like organ systems like bowel, bladder, reproductive organs, prostate, ovaries, uterus, and then all of the signal down from your low back through your hips all the way down to your toes. So there's a lot of systems that are involved there and that get stress upon them beyond just our legs and low back pain when these curves aren't intact. So again, looking at a structure that you can tell, this obviously looks very different down here. There is not much space right here. That vertebra doesn't have room below it. Above it, it doesn't line up with the one above it or below it at the sacrum or tailbone right here. So a lot of change to this structure may have been from a trauma or a fall and was just never caught because it didn't necessarily cause them pain earlier in life when it happened. So lumbar curves are correctable, as well as those cervical curves of the neck with the proper treatment. We do a lot of chiropractic care, obviously, for correct mobility and positioning. And then there are different traction and rehab devices we can do to create space and to create curve back into the spine. Muscles and ligaments and the joints just need the repetitive motion. And many times we can correct a curve that has been damaged, as long as it's not into that phase 3, phase 4 degeneration. So another picture here is just looking at when they actually do tons of testing with the posture pump company and the pump versions of rehabilitation to help with curves and to create space. So if someone's having disc compression and that bulging of the disc, it can be pushing upon the spinal cord and then create a lot of symptomatology, as well as lack of function, lack of use of hands, lack of use of feet and legs. So similar to them showing in that middle, how if you roll up a towel and put it under the neck, what that looks like when they take the image of a person doing that motion. The left picture is not somebody not laying on a device at all. And then the third one to the right there is what's happening when you're laying on that posture pump to create space where those arrows are, and the yellow arrows are in the picture. And then the blue arrows are where that disc is bulging out back towards the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is this part right down the middle. You can see it through that gray space. It's connecting as the brain there, becoming the spinal cord as it enters your neck. So least amount of compression, they get anywhere from 25 to 58% of angle or curve back, or decompression, I should say, of the space as you inflate that pump and lay on that component in order to create the curve, basically, right? Create movement. And then that can increase that space over time with repetition. So really helpful in utilizing tools once we have mobility and have pressure off of the spine itself, to then create repetitive motion in teaching the body that there's a different way to be. So you can see that loss of neck curve if you know anybody that walks in that forward posture, or where their ears release it forward from their shoulders, or the older person who has maybe been that way for decades and they literally kind of have that upper chest forward hump up on the top of their ridge right here. That is all from that forward posture. So this is, looking specifically at a neck curve, but how we want to create that angle to give longevity and life to our spinal cord and our communication path between brain and body. So it's very vital in not just keeping the structures. They always say you can't replace, there's no replaceable part for the spine that's better than your original part, right? We have not gotten to that level of any kind of technology or science. So everything we can do to keep a healthy curves in your spine literally create longevity for your brain, your nervous system, and your structure to not break down faster. So the two examples I give that people tell me really help them connect those dots is if you had and you see someone with poor posture, know that that can be supported and helped with chiropractic in many different ways, whether their curve is really affected yet or whether the posture is still just driving their muscles driving that forward posture. Finding out is key. When you know, then we can do something about that. When we don't know and we only go on symptoms, a lot of times by the time those symptoms are there, these things are happening. There's such discompression that they're having pain and symptoms, whether it's severe sharp shooting stuff down their arms or legs or numbness tingling, which is even worse. So anytime you're seeing a postural distortion on someone, whether it be side to side or a lot of forward tipping or tilting, then know that that's something we can help support for them and correct, so that very similar to how I say braces work with teeth, we're working on creating, teeth, it's kind of to create a pretty curve. Well, it also helps them not degenerate and rub down and wear down faster. Teeth yet are replaceable, and it's expensive and not necessarily comfortable, but you can replace them. There's no replacing bones in our spine. There's nothing replacing holding you up and supporting your nervous system. But it's a similar concept when you use braces to realign a perfect, pretty, top or bottom palate or jaw or the alignment of the teeth. We're working at structurally aligning spine and then supporting it with something that you don't wear necessarily a brace for. Some people have to with curves. Most people don't. And it's something that you can change that movement of spine and how well the muscles, ligaments, and joints
wear a brace.
New memory pattern of holding a better posture with proper exercise and movement to get it there. So I always say, if you see postural distortions, it's like someone having a vehicle. You think about how much we take care of our vehicles and we service our cars and get oil changes and rotate our tires, right? Do all those maintenance things. Chiropractic is absolutely what you should be doing for your spine or for your own body, just like we maintenance all of our things and our toys and our possessions, because we know that's what keeps them working and running. So I always say, we do that on a, every couple month basis, say with our vehicles. And if you had something that was out of alignment, like your vehicle, and it pulled to the left or pulled to the right when you were putting on the brakes or just driving and pulling, it makes no difference if you're not using it, right? If the car sat in the garage, okay, well, it doesn't really matter that the alignment is off because you're not utilizing it. It'd be like if our bodies, if we weren't using them, it wouldn't necessarily matter as much. And that's obviously not the case. You go to drive that car, the more you do it with that wear and tear, it wears down the tires, it can wear down the axle, it can change what's happening because of the stress on the frame, and you could have a bigger problem than just replacing a tire or two if you continue to drive on it like that. So when we say, well, we don't do it with our vehicles, why would we do that with our bodies, right? Why would we do that when those curves and those movements and those postures in our body support our entire working order, if you will. So I'll end on the slide that kind of talks about some of those facts of what the picture you were just looking at. So when you're using something that is decompressing and creating space, you see how much you get improvement with curve versus just linear traction, which is like something that just decompresses and tractions you like straight up and down. So the best example I can give to that is, I was just asked about it today. I'd say every other week at least I get asked, are inversion tables great? Should I be using one of those? That can create some space. It does not and will not ever create a curve. So it can give you some temporary relief by just decompressing and giving you some space there, but we need the curve. So if the curve is intact, then sure, maybe a decompression table or something like an inversion table may give somebody a little bit of relief and some space. But using those numbers on the left, improving 26 of 36, so 72% of people getting that, using a device that works on the curve, gave them improvement. 6 of that 36 maintained where they were. So this, why I bring this point up is that I cannot help a sometimes 40-year-old or 60-year-old spine, depending on when the damage was done, look like a 20-year-old spine. None of us can. And why it's so important to do it is we want to maintain what we have and not see it get further. So many times what we can do is slow down the aging, slow down that arthritis, slow down the compression on the spinal cord, and the parts and pieces to the body that it goes to. And again, slow that degenerative phase down. And only a few people of that 36 were compromised, or most of the time when I see a percentage of that, it's people that just don't respond because they're past a point of responding to working on the curve. It's too much for them at the stage they're in. So we usually have to do other very gentle care to help, again, preserve what they have. But sometimes it's past a point of being able to do curve change or curve correction. Versus, as you see on the other side, the linear traction, this is more, you see a much smaller percentage of people who improved, let alone maintained, and how much more were compromised. Many times that's just because that pulling traction doesn't do well on a spine that doesn't have a curve. And I never find a really good analogy for that, but it's just when you have a curve, it's like if you pulled on both ends, there's still room for it to move, right? Even if it's straightened, there's room for it to go somewhere. When something's already straight, it's like already pulling a taut rubber band. It just creates more pressure on either end. So linear traction feels very good to someone who has a curve and not great to someone who doesn't have a curve. So ways in which the research is out there showing how important and imperative it is to gain those curves, and different ways in which we can do it. So if that's a piece that we haven't addressed with you yet in your care, it's because it's early on for you and you haven't made it possibly to that first or second re-exam to see where you're at, to being able to get mobility to add this in to your care regimen and to your self-care at home. This is a component that, like, people wear braces for sometimes 2-4 years at a time and then go into a retainer and then go into or some kind of thing at night. It's the fact that once change is made, change needs to be continually supported, right? So you may not be at a place where you can be doing that yet. And once you do, it's going to be a component that you do at home outside the office at least 5 times a week, and you'll build up to a certain amount of minutes of time once we get you to that stage of being able to do these kinds of movements and activities. And then over time, it can be 9, 12, 18 months that people start to see curve change. So in that way, it can be similar to braces, where it takes time. It took probably decades for it to get to the stage it's in. So it can take months to years to regain that curve, but very doable for many, many people that come into our office. So knowing that, hopefully you know where your curves are and you know where they stand and what we're working towards with you. And if you haven't seen and we haven't started any of this with you, it's just because it's early on and you will get there in your care. So I'm going to try to open it back up to answer any questions that I can about curves or that you may have from the presentation itself. Give me 1 second. And for those of you here, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you engaging in healthy curves and how to support yours. And let me pause recording.